The tendency has always been to organize ourselves in a way that mitigates the effects of the natural world.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
We always, from the get-go,
we protect ourselves from the natural world.
We try and protect ourselves from
protections, yes.
Whether it's from ancient tribal patterns to the the cities that we gather in today, right? It's like we're trying to insulate ourselves from the actual chaos of what life is about. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode in the Spiritual Maturity series on the Wind Ministries podcast. I'm your co-host of this particular series, Joshua Hoffert, otherwise known as Josh Hoffert, and I'm the founder of Wind Ministries. I guess the co-host of the podcast and co-founder of Wind Ministries, because my wife also exists and is very important. And I'm joined by my other person on the podcast, Dad Hoffert.
Hello.
He is here. Yes, he's in the house. Well, in his house, not in my house. So,
true.
Yes. Yeah, we're fairly geographically separated. You might not
2,500 miles at least.
Yeah, it's at least that. Yes. So I'm in Prince Edward Island, the home of Anne of Green Gables. Yeah, and that's where I presently reside. And my dad is in Florida, the home of
Pensacola, Florida,
the home of Ron DeSantis. So
yes, Blue Angels, and et cetera, et cetera.
Is it really? That's where the Blue Angels are. Yeah,
that's right. It's their home base.
Yeah, yeah. We actually took the kids on Canada Day weekend, which is just Canada's got to try and one up the U.S. on their National Day of Celebration, so they make it July 1st instead of July 4th. And on Canada Day out here, they had, I think it was Canada Day last year, I'm pretty sure anyway, they had the Canadian version of the Blue Angels.
Oh, cool.
And which was great fun for the kids. And they're called the Snowbirds. And they do the same kind of flybys and all kinds of acrobatic aerial maneuvers, and the kids just loved it. So I don't know where the Snowbirds hail from, right? They're not, I don't think they're from PEI, but we did see them. So
cool.
Yes. Yeah. And it was great fun was had by all. So yes. Anyway, so how are things down in Florida, Pops? You got bugs coming out?
Bugs and storms and all kinds of interesting stuff, but it's also beautiful.
Banana spiders, for those that you
haven't seen any yet this year.
Okay, right.
I'm a little disappointed. I really like my buddies.
The biggest spiders we have in Prince Edward Island are like daddy long-leg spiders, whatever those are called.
Well, they say that those banana spiders can take out like 10,000 bugs in a month. So
you want them
around. We meet 3 or 4 of those guys. I'll take them.
Right.
I'm on an acre, so that's okay. But
we don't. The thing that's interesting about weather and PEI when it comes to that is PEI being code for Prince Edward Island is there's these short spurts of when the bugs come out, and because the weather is so cold, right? 90% of the year it's too cold for any kind of major bug explosion. But then when it warms up, the bugs explode in, there's this couple weeks it's this bug, this couple weeks it's this bug, this couple weeks it's this bug. So then by the time you get to mid-September, it's pretty much all died down again because of the weather. And
there's something to be said for that.
Yeah. Although when they explode, it's a density of explosion.
You just want to be gone.
Yeah, that's right. So the people come here for the winter or for the summer because of that, because the summers are very mildly warm right?
Yeah.
It's not like Florida's summers, but you send the kids outside in the middle of July and they'll come back with about 30 mosquito bites.
Mm.
So easily.
Yeah.
And
I
yeah.
recall that when I was a kid, we visited Minnesota
Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah.
to the our relatives' lake houses. Man, were there some mosquitoes there.
Mm-hmm.
My fear of mosquitoes has was firmly rooted in that period of time in my life, because we're going to talk about trauma.
We are. That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
so there's trauma right there.
There you go. Trauma, Minnesotan trauma. There you
My
go.
my cousins didn't tell us that. They probably didn't care, they grew up there. But my brother Steve and I were we were out messing around the lake, and it was getting to be dusk, and all of a sudden we saw these big black clouds gathering all
Oh my
around,
gosh.
and we had to go under the water and stay under the water. And finally, after about 20 minutes, we just made a dash for the house. And
Wow.
yeah, I was traumatized by mosquitoes at an earlier age.
Firmly rooted, but probably not subcortical. So
No,
yeah.
I was certainly, it's not prelingual, subcortical, any of those
Yeah.
things. It was certainly, um, I would think I was probably 7 years old at that
Right.
point. So
Right. Yeah. So you're into the not the infant stage, but the child
child
stage.
stage, yeah.
Yeah. So those are all things where, by the way, for those of you that are going, what are they talking about? Those are all things that we're going to talk about as the
Those are,
podcast.
yeah, developments of the brain,
Yeah. That's
periods of
right.
time in which the brain develops certain uh,
Capacities.
portions and
Yeah.
capacities of the
Yeah.
brain.
Yeah.
Yeah, those
Or
portions of the brain
operation.
are functioning better and
Right.
developing, and
And
they require the brain at that point requires certain activities and certain responses from us, in the world and the world around us, so that
that's
it
right.
can grow and gain the things that it is needed. And what we find in life far too often is, because we live in a world that has much damage. I
Yeah.
think so. Within Christian language, we would call we're in a fallen world.
Right.
Um, but whether you're using Christian language or not, we look at a world that has difficulties and violence and anger and all of these sorts of things, human against human, that create places of trauma and keep us from moving forward in the best way possible that our brains are anticipating,
Yeah.
so that we gain everything we need so we can become fully human as we grow. So we get little bits and pieces that get stunted,
Yeah.
some more than others,
That's
and we
right.
can talk a bit about that, and
Yeah,
as
we
we go
will.
along today.
It's interesting that as humans, uh, the tendency has always been to organize ourselves in a way that mitigates the effects of the natural world.
Oh, that's
Um,
interesting. Yeah,
where like we always from the get
we
go, right?
protect
Whether
ourselves from the natural world.
we try
Yes,
and protect ourselves from
self
there, from the
protections. Yes,
whether it's from ancient tribal patterns to the the cities that we gather in today, right? It's
yeah.
like we're trying to insulate ourselves from the actual chaos of what life is about, and then we delude ourselves into thinking that life is simple, normal, and peaceful until something calamitous happens and we realize,
Well,
for
because
instance, a
so
worldwide
really,
pandemic, right, where
yeah,
all of a sudden
the
it's
language
well,
of that is that are we are self protecting
yes,
all the time.
yes,
And
yes,
I love the story of um, Cain
right,
after he kills his brother. I don't love that part of the story,
right, right,
um, but in the Hebrew scripture, so there's a thing we're trying to learn here, right? In this
yeah,
story, and in the scripture, in the Hebrew scriptures, the God comes to Cain and says, "I'll protect you."
right,
if you'll just, you know, trust me.
Yeah.
And Cain, it's like it's you know, it's kind of like the pause in the story is Cain thinks about it. You can kind of almost see him thinking about it, and then says, "Hmm, I don't know if I'm going to go that direction.
Right.
I'm going to build a city. I'm going
Yeah.
to put
That's
walls
right.
up around myself to protect myself." And it's this conscious choice he makes.
Yeah.
I'm going to find a way to protect myself,
Yeah.
and because I don't think I can trust Yahweh
Right.
to try to protect me
Right.
because I know what I've done.
Right.
And I don't know that I can live with myself in what I've done. So I'm going to
Yeah.
protect myself from others that might want to harm me.
Right.
And wow, isn't that a story of what humans do
That's right.
every day for ourselves? We find ways to protect ourselves because we don't trust.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's almost we kind of tacitly admit in the way we protect ourselves that the world should be a different place, but it's not.
Yes.
It's like, well, we recognize there are certain parameters that will aid our flourishing, but we can't quite get there on our own.
Mm,
And so let's try and create systems, systems of governance, systems of municipal control, systems of family dynamics, and hopefully with that we'll be able to mitigate the disaster. But then when it happens, what do you do?
yeah.
And it happens to everybody, because you
And
can't.
why? So really what we're dealing with here is the why does it happen?
Why does it happen? Yeah, the
Right.
why
And
and the how,
yeah.
right? It is the why. Why does it happen, and how does it affect us?
Yeah.
Right. And so what we wanted to do in this episode is talk through in kind of a general sense the makeup of the brain and
Mm,
distill that down to a working functional knowledge. Now, we're talking about a very complex and complicated organ, not just, I mean, and the way
well,
that
we
the
hope it is
we
anyway.
hope it is, yeah.
Yeah.
And the way that you could get into all kinds of are the mind and the brains the same thing, and is the right, like the conscious thought process and the brain, is it the same thing? And we're not going to get into that, right? That's a philosophical conversation. And then also, is the brain where memory is always stored?
Mm.
um and because that's another
Is an
thing.
interesting thing. Yeah.
It is an interesting thing, right?
Yeah.
Because we talked about subcortical trauma, and then you have body memory, and so there's all these new things that we begin to understand.
Yeah, and when you say body memory, there's positive and negative body
Yes.
memory. I mean, how
Yes.
does an athlete know how to um, do the things they do so well? They
Yeah.
train their body to do
Before
things in
conscious
a particular
thought, they
way,
do
right?
them.
And
Yeah.
they get their body so well trained that their body will do what it needs to do without any thought.
Yes,
Yes,
exactly. That is body memory, right? And
right,
Paul seems to talk about this, of course, in Romans
right.
7, about body memory. That there's a law within your members teaching you how to act and behave.
Yeah,
And so when we look at what we understand scientifically today about the brain and the body and the way memory is stored, and then the way trauma is stored,
yeah,
um, and then we start looking at what the kind of things that Jesus talked about, and the kind of things, especially you read through the book of Proverbs and you compare that with a notes on, say, a from a neurologist or neuroscientist, and you go, oh, the Bible actually had something to say about this.
hmm, yeah,
And so when we look at the Bible and we look at modern advances in neuroscience and modern advances just in the physiological sciences, we go, oh, we're understanding how things work, and it's actually making sense when it comes to the scriptures, which I think we'll look at that even just a little bit more as we go through this. Like I was saying to my dad before we started recording, how it seems like Jesus actually lays out a system of prayer in the Lord's Prayer that actually addresses all of those portions of our brain as they develop. And so let's Well, the first thing that we'll say in regards to the stuff we're going to say about the brain is that largely our influences we wear them on our sleeves, and our influences are the life model guys, Jim Wilder, and the books like Living from the Heart Jesus Gave You, Jim Wilder's book Renovated. I know you like the book about men. What is it? I've not read it, but
Oh, the Complete Guide to Living with
yes,
Men.
the
Yeah,
complete guide.
it's not in print anymore.
Not in print anymore. Rare Leadership is another good one. The Other Half of Church. But really the kind of the base for all of that would be the book that Wilder co-wrote with a number of other people called Living from the Heart Jesus Gave You.
Right.
And so that's the Life Model Works group of guys. They've been very influential and very helpful for us in thinking through some of these things.
Because they've been taking brain science, that a lot of it coming from Dr. Alan Shore.
Yes,
that they have
not Alan Shore is not a Christian. He's a Jewish neuroscientist, and
UCLA neuroscientist
who's done many studies on the brain, and who is actually aware of how Wilder and the Life Model guys have taken his research and applied it to Christian formation, and is quite pleased with the results. That's what the Life Model Works guys have told me anyway. So we're talking a quote unquote secular studies being applied in a Christian setting,
right?
In a Christian sense. So
which will offend some people,
but we want to say that because we're not saying, like, there was a for instance a popular notion that was a quote unquote study. Remember the water crystals thing?
Oh yeah.
Right. And there was I think it was a Japanese scientist who had performed these supposed experiments on water. And if you prayed over the water, it changed the makeup of the crystals. And then if you took pictures of them on the microscopic level, you could tell the differences. If you said words of hate over the water, words of blessing over the water, supposedly changed the
classical the water. Music,
yeah, exactly.
Playing punk rock or something like that. Yeah.
And so that entered into there was a lot of and there still is actually people who don't realize how thoroughly debunked that guy's research has become. And so that was really a popular notion about 20 years ago in discipleship teachings. There's power of life and the death in the tongue. Look at this study; it backs up what we're saying, and things like that, right? Well, so what I'm trying to say is we're not referencing studies that were done to support someone's hypothesis, who then monetized their hypothesis and made money selling their water. So, which is what this guy did in Japan. And then people just kind of took it and ran with it. What we're talking about are secular neurologists studying the brain, and then we're looking at their findings and going, there's something to say about Christian formation here that's deeply applicable to the words of Jesus, the teachings of the New Testament, and then the Old Testament as well. And so which
one would expect would be true.
I know. If what the Bible presents is true, and it's a presenting the way the world is and the way the world works, then you would expect to find findings in the world that, this is what Romans classically says: the invisible attributes of God have been made on display in all of creation. So you would hope that if you investigate creation, you find things that confirm the Creator, right? So that's what we're saying that we found. So there's a lot of stuff there in the Life Model guys that is very helpful. And then there's other secular authors, and many of them being doctorate level researchers, like Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote The Body Keeps the Score. Bessel van der Kolk was very instrumental in developing the diagnosis for PTSD.
Right. Yeah. He was working with veterans.
Yeah, he was working with veterans and seeing the impact of trauma on the brain.
Right.
and so the book, The Body Keeps the Score, is very helpful for understanding that.
Yeah.
We have Peter Levine, I think he's an avowed agnostic or atheist, but he's um, uh, I'm pretty sure he's a doctorate, but he is definitely a therapist. And he's written a book, Waking the Tiger, talking about the way that, especially looking at our fight and flight response, trauma, and the need for healing there. And so we're pulling. What I'm trying to say is we're pulling from a wide variety of sources when we're presenting the material that we're about to present, especially over the next 20 episodes or so. But with that said, not each one of these schools of thought are in agreement, right? So this is neuroscience is a relatively new field of study in the sense of, anything that's being studied today is not relatively new in the sense of all of humanity and human history, right?
Right.
Right. So it's not so much that we're going, this is everything that you need to know. We're trying to distill a number of different things down into a helpful way of thinking that would impact you and would give you insight into the way your brain works, your body works, and how Christ comes and forms us in the midst of that. So That's what we're saying. Yeah. So you may read this and go, well, that's not how I think of it. Well, that's fine. But we're trying to tell you we also have studied and researched this. So take it in that sense.
And we're also aware that there are different opinions.
That's
a new
right.
Science.
Yeah.
It's not something that everybody agrees on. But so walk with us as you will.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But there's some very good information out there that is really helpful for understanding these things. I'm like I was saying, the Ian McGilchrist, The Master and His Emissary. I've been working through that book, and it's a loaded book. It's like every page is dense, but it's really fascinating when he talks about the popular notion of the right-left divide of the brain and what the actual implications of that is and what it's actually like. Because the popular notion is never right, by the way. So it's pretty much, yes, it's never right. Okay, so let's dive into this just so people understand, and we'll just kind of talk through some of these things. They're basically, when it comes to the development of the brain, we see things in 4 different layers and 4 different stages of development, and the brain and the way the brain develops that also reflects, as it should, the stages of maturity in a person's life. And so we're going to go through each individual center of the brain that develops and each stage of life as it reflects in that center. But what we want to talk about today is just the basic overview of the 4 stages, or the 4 levels of the brain. In the 4 levels of the brain,
say stages. It was the stages of development of the
brain.
Yeah.
We're just not talking
developing over about a 20-25 year period.
Right? Yes, it is depending on your male or female, right? Because the female brain is more fully formed around the age of 18. The male brain is more fully formed around the age of 25. The 4 parts.
45,
that's right. We're always trying to grow. So we're always trying to mature because we're stuck in fart jokes. Yes.
But they are good jokes.
They are good jokes, like my 6-year-old farts and I laugh at it still. So my wife rolls her eyes and I laugh. Exactly. Yeah, that's right. So we're kind of subprimal, I guess, in some sense. Men are.
Somebody's got to do it.
Yeah, that's right. Someone does. Yeah. So the 4 distinct parts, thinking through each one, we think through each one as a level because of the stage of development, and it actually is a layer of the brain. The first layer of the brain is the thalamus, and the thalamus is part of the limbic system. We're talking more to the base level of the brain. It's the first part of the brain that really starts to develop in a child's infancy. And there's more parts than just the thalamus, but we kind of sum up all the parts by the statement, the thalamus. So we're not going to deal with every single part of the brain. Some are bigger, some are smaller than others. There's the hypothalamus, there's the pituitary gland, there's all these other things. So we're saying the thalamus is one of the first parts of the brain that develops, and it's basically called the attachment center of the brain. I think Wilder calls it the joy center of the brain. It's the
The joy centers up here.
okay. Well, all right. So we'll get some of the things.
All right.
So the attachment center is one of the first places of the brain that develops, and the second layer of the brain would be where we'd find the amygdala, and the amygdala is where you find your fight or flight response. So that's the response center of the brain. The the fight or flight response. And then the fourth layer of the brain is the cingulate cortex, and so now we're starting to get into, or the third level. Yeah, so I jumped from second to fourth. The third layer of the brain, cingulate cortex, and that is called the attunement center of the brain, and I'll explain why they're called those things in just a second. And the prefrontal cortex is the last layer of the brain that develops, and that's the highest layer of the brain that develops, and that is called the executive center. And so we've got the attachment center, we've got the fight or flight center, we've got the attunement center, and we have the executive center. So those are the rough four layers, and each one corresponds to an actual physical location in the brain, and each one develops at different stages in a person's life.
Right.
Something. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, because a baby is not doing trigonometry.
Exactly. Trigonometry would be an executive center function. It would not be a attachment center function. What a baby needs to grow and develop is different than what a 20-year-old male or female need to grow and develop.
I don't think anybody needs trigonometry.
Well, I guess yeah.
You want to go to the moon or something, or fly in an airplane.
You're an appraiser. You're supposed to need these things. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. You use these things more than most people would anyway.
So,
yeah. So yeah, we've got the four layers, and then something to say about each one of those layers is those layers actually trauma impacts each one of the centers at different stages of development and different ages in different ways, and the outworking of that later in life changes how we respond to certain stimuli based on about what portion of the brain, what stage of development, and what was needed, and what the outworking of that. The kind of things that we need healing from differ based on what happened to us and what time and what age they happened to us.
That trauma, in the sense of I would say it informs our choices, in the sense that it shapes them. We have trauma, and trauma will say, not that it speaks, but trauma will give you that thought. So in a fight or flight situation, trauma will say, danger, danger, go.
Yeah.
Even though there might not be danger, but the response will be informed by previous experiences that both the brain and the body have maintained. They've kept over the course of maybe decades.
Yeah, that's right. And all that stuff is stuff we'll get into at a greater depth. So basically, the way that the brain is functioning on a consistent basis, and again, we're trying to simplify so it's easier to understand, is that in the layers of your brain, actually the first layer, the thalamus, the attachment center, actually serves to feed external stimuli to the rest of the centers of the brain. So it actually anything that happens to you goes through each of those layers, and it's a split second. It's like it's happening faster than the speed of thought, and that's why we tend to react to situations rather than measurably respond, or we react and then have to adjust our reaction, because we get to the executive function, which would be the level of conscious thought, which is also called the identity center. That's when we start to reason our response rather than react out of the pain and wounding that is actually resident in the other centers of the brain. So when it comes to the way that the brain filters information or external stimuli, it starts in the thalamus, which is the attachment center. The thalamus, Bessel van der Kolk calls the thalamus the smoke detector of the brain. So it's like, is there something happening?
Yeah.
right? Is there something happening? And again, we'll get into this later, but if depending on the attachment center, depending on the type of attachment that has been developed, now we're getting into attachment theory, which we'll have a whole other episode on.
So healthy versus unhealthy, etc.
Yeah, well, there's 3 basic styles of attachment, right? 4 if you separate 2 of them out.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that later.
Which
But
I think it's helpful to separate the two. But
yes, it is. Yeah. So if depending on how the attachment center has been formed, will tell you how the thalamus reacts to the smoke, how the smoke detector reacts. Right? Is that we had just yesterday actually. My mother-in-law dropped off my son got a stuffed animal for his 6th birthday. The nose of it fell off the next day. My mother-in-law went, exchanged it, and brought it back yesterday. When she was bringing it back, the smoke detector in our house went off. Right, so good illustration of the story. So I had to go upstairs, which is where, because one of the smoke detector upstairs was going off, sniffing around. What's happening, right? Smoke detector's gone off. Now I'm investigating the threat. I've got to find out what it. Yeah, exactly. And come to find out, the reason why it's gone off is it's low in batteries. And so now I've got to remove it. Yeah, not danger, but because there was a problem in the system, it alerted me to something that actually wasn't a threat.
Yeah.
Right. So this is where, when there's a problem in the attachment center, it begins to alert me to something that might not be a threat. Right. And so I've got to remove the battery and now solve the problem in the smoke detector. It's a good analogy for when the amygdala when the thalamus is not responding in the way that it's designed to respond. I had this thought one time, actually, Dad, is when you think of Adam and Eve in the garden, and well, we might have to get there. Let's get there in a second. I'll revisit that if I remember to. So the thalamus feeds the information now to the amygdala, and the amygdala is the fight or flight center. And so now it's determining whether this thing is a threat and how I'm going to respond to this thing. Right. So I've got the warning signs have gone off because something has happened. Someone is yelled at me from the side of the street. Right. Now, so now I've got my thalamus has gone. There's something happening. Right. Now my amygdala goes, do I run or do I fight? Right. What is the actual threat? Or is it a threat?
Or is it a threat? Right. You have to determine whether or not it's a threat.
Because it could be someone who's mad at me, or it could be a friend that's just seen me. And so now I've got to, so it's my thalamus is feeding information up to my amygdala. Now my amygdala is going, is this a threat? How do I respond? It's feeding information up to the singular cortex, and the singular cortex is going, is this a person I recognize? Is this someone who's part of my peer group? Is this someone who gets me? Or is it someone who I don't recognize? Right. So it's feeding this external stimuli up through, and then eventually it gets to the prefrontal cortex, which is, what kind of person am I and how do I respond to these situations? Right. So depending on the stimuli, my brain has now gone through that function like in 6 times in a millisecond. It is. And so the brain feeds it through each of those stages to determine how I'm going to react and respond to anything that happens to me.
Right.
And if anywhere in the process the system breaks down, then I don't know how to respond, and I'll respond in a way that I act like I'm not myself. Yeah. When we talk about the process of spiritual formation, and we were talking about spiritual maturity and emotional health, is the ability to navigate the big 6 emotions and recover yourself. Well, when you have a breakdown in that process, it's very difficult to recover yourself.
Right.
And so that's when we're talking about the process the brain goes through to tell you how to respond to a situation. The way that the brain grows, the way the brain develops, will actually impact how you respond to the external stimuli. Yeah. Anything to add to that, Pomps?
Well, I like the the idea of a fast track and a slow track in the brain.
Yes.
And those first three are a fast track. I
Yes.
mean, boom, boom, boom. It's just so quick.
Faster than conscious thought.
Oh, way faster. Yeah. And
Yeah.
then the process of who am I and how do I respond to this sort of a thing is a much slower track. Not in the sense that it's slow, but it's slower than that initial track. So the
that's right.
slow track is a slower process where you have to go through more stages within your context. How do I respond to this? Who am I? Who are this? How does this whole thing go? And then I put that information together a little differently than I do the first portion of that.
Yeah.
It's like
here's the difference.
My emotional or my what do you want to call it? Unfiltered responses are boom, I'm there. And now I have to decide, why am I there?
Here's an illustration. It's the difference between someone throws a ball at you, say it's a hard baseball, and you react, whether you cover yourself up, if you're playing catch, you throw your hand up and you catch it, whatever. Right. Someone throws a ball at you and your body begins to react before you tell it to react. Right. That's in the fast track. You have a way of responding.
Yes.
That you're just gonna react to what's happening,
and then you're gonna say, "Wait, hey, why are you throwing this at me?"
Yeah. or the other part of it is the difference between someone saying to you, "Hey, watch out!" Right now, you're in executive function. Who was it that said that to me? What are they talking about? Let me examine the circumstances, and then I'm hit by the ball.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, so that would be an illustration of the difference between the two. Yeah. Reacting to the stimuli versus someone shouting at me, and now I've got to process and figure it out what's happening. So that's when you're, you wake up in the morning, you roll over, your spouse is in bed beside you, here's an external stimuli, right? Oh, this is a safe person. Or maybe they're not a safe person, depending on what's happening within the relationship or what let's hope they are. But, I also know some people are in difficult places, right? So right off the bat, your amygdala, right from the get-go, your thalamus is feeding information to your amygdala, and you may wake up and you may be immediately heightened tension because this person isn't a safe person. So now I've got my stimuli, the smoke detector's gone, something's here. I know I need to respond. And now what kind of people am I? Who are my people around me? And then who am I and how do I respond to this? So that process happens I don't even know how many times a day you could say, but it's
constant,
limitless how many times it happens. Right. So then if you understand that the reason I react when I see this particular person, maybe it's someone who's hurt you, maybe it's someone who loves you. The reason I react is because your brain has gone through that process. And now if it's someone who I'm anxious around, my palms get sweaty, my heart rate increases because my thalamus has seen the person, detected that there's an issue here. My amygdala has said, this person's a threat. They might not be a threat, but your amygdala says they're a threat. And
it releases certain chemicals.
And it releases certain chemicals in your autonomic nervous system. And it just happens. It's like, if you, for instance, if you have you've gone through a situation with friends and the friends have betrayed you and you're very hurt, right? Let's just say that, right? So now you've got another person who's presenting themselves in a friendly way. Well, what's happening in your brain, because if you have an unresolved pain from that wounding, what's happening in your brain is that new person is like a bear charging down at you. You don't know how threatening they are, but you know that there's something you need to be worried about. That person may be very generic. They're not presented any reason to not trust them, to not engage with them, or to not walk with them. But right off the bat, when they start to be friendly with you, your autonomic nervous system goes because your smoke detector has said, hey, there's a friendly person, they're a threat. Because friendly people have hurt me before, so I can't trust them. Yeah. And so now immediately my body is responding as if a bear is running to me. and now I don't know how to react to that person, and I tend to turn away from them and turn them off rather than engage in the possibility of friendship.
Yeah.
So that's a simple example of how that process actually either can hinder my relationships or help my relationships. If I have healthy relationships, if I have a healthy expectation, then I see a friendly person, their face lights up when they see me. My face lights up because they're not a threat. Now my amygdala has fed up to my singular cortex. They're not a threat. Oh, these are my people. These are the people that I love. They love me. And now my prefrontal cortex goes, this is someone that I can engage with. So that process is happening multiple times a
where that
second.
joy center is, and
Yes.
it creates
Yes.
that place of joy, which is the only part of the brain that actually continues to grow. So
okay, right, and that's another thing that we'll get into. So that's basically the way that your brain is working. Now, I think let's spend just a couple more minutes on this. I think when you look at the teachings of Jesus, you see him, because I'm relatively convinced that Jesus thoroughly understood the human brain. And when he talks about, for instance, when he talks about the thoughts of the Pharisees needed to be cut at the base of the tree, right? When he says that to he talks about the brood of vipers, you need to cut off the base of the tree, and anyway, he says that anyway. He says it. Okay,
the
it's
root
early
needs
in
to be
one of the
taken
gospels.
out. Yeah.
Yeah, the root needs to be taken out. Yeah, and he compares the thought process to a tree, right? Well, when you understand the makeup of the brain, that actually the thing that binds our neurons together, the synaptic cleft, which connects neurons together. When you look at the makeup of a neuron, it's called a dendron, that one of the portions of the neuron, because it looks like a tree. It looks exactly like a tree. And so the tree branches grow out from the neuron, and they're called dendrons. And then they have dendronites, which is part of the synaptic cleft, which connects to other neurons. So when people have described the makeup of the brain, when you actually look at it at a microscopic level, as a collection of trees branching together. So Jesus says, cut the root out at the base of it, and you're going, oh, actually, that's a pretty apt description of changing the way that you think, even on a subatomic level.
Yeah.
And which is really interesting. So I think there's something to be said for how the Bible presents these things in the mysterious way. That did Jesus have a microscope and investigate the brain? No, but did he understand the makeup of the physiological anatomy of a person? Probably. So I guess it depends on how much you think his knowledge was limitless as a man. So anyway, there's a
discussion for another day.
A discussion for another day. Anyway, in any case, he presents practices and teachings that would be very helpful for addressing each one of those layers of the brain, and for addressing trauma in each one of those layers of the brain. And a good place to codify that is in the Lord's Prayer. And because in the Lord's Prayer, he actually addresses all four layers, and the felt needs of all four layers, and the experience of trauma, and how that impacts all four layers in the simplicity of the Lord's Prayer. So in give us this day our daily bread, right? He is addressing the attachment center. Who will take care of me? Who will sustain me and nourish me? That's what the attachment center asks, right? Yeah. Give us this day our daily bread. God will sustain you and nourish me. And the attachment center is malnourished when there's no strong attachment. And so give us this day our daily bread is, let me expect to be richly attached to the provision that God would provide.
Because one of the things that when that portion of the brain is developing, one of the things that's required, what it needs in order to move to the next level, is to understand how I can receive from others. How do I receive the things I need?
And that's right.
And some people never get past that, or never really get that developed correctly.
Yep.
And so it shifts or changes the way that they react later in life. But that's another topic.
Yeah. Next layer is deliver us from evil. Right? Will I be protected and safe?
Yeah.
That addresses that. I deliver us from evil. That's the fight or flight response. Right. Yeah. So give us me this day my daily bread. I've got an attachment center that's being developed when I'm and we'll talk about attachment and salvation at some point. But now I've got deliver us from evil.
Who can I trust?
And who can I trust? Exactly.
Right.
Yes, exactly. That's the fight or flight response.
Yes.
And then the that's that center of the brain. Then the next center would be the singular cortex or cingulate cortex. It's anyway. I think I misspoke earlier.
Probably.
And forgive us our sins as we forgive the sins of others. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive the trespasses of others. That's the relational center, the attunement center, the cingulate cortex. And so now, what kind of people are we, and what do my people do? Well, we're forgiving people, right?
Well,
so
and
this is addressing.
That's what a teenager is doing. That's that next stage of the brain,
Yeah.
where they're. If you've ever noticed that your teen, or if you are a teen, that your teen begins to pull away,
yeah,
and hang out with their friends, and you wonder what's going on. The natural process is, I'm looking to find out who my people are.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
Who are we about? And so, when the brain develops in a healthy way, then healthy developments of I'm connecting with this kind of people. I know who my people are.
Right.
When it's not healthy, well, we start making interesting choices.
We do. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So forgive us and we'll be forgiven is a prayer that addresses the need of the cingulate cortex.
Right.
And then lead us not into temptation. Here's an area of the prayer that deals with the executive function, because now I'm dealing with temptation, the kind of things that come. I actually have to think through the kind of people who I am, who loves me, who gets me, who's around me. Am I loved? Am I cherished? All these things.
How do I interact with people in the world around me?
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Which is that adult, when the brain hits the adult stage.
Yes.
Then we are having to deal with that, because when you get to that adult or parental stage, you're looking at how do I help other people form?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I gotta know who I am so that I can help other people form.
Exactly. So every stage of the Lord's Prayer actually addresses a particular felt need in a particular portion of the brain. And if you have everybody to some degree, you are malformed, right? Because as we said earlier, humanity is constantly organizing it in a way to try and mitigate the chaos around us.
Right.
But that chaos always makes its way to some degree or another. And to some people, it's a much stronger degree.
Sure.
So why do you come to the point where you recognize you have a string of broken relationships, you have a hard time opening up to people, and you're going, I'm not happy and I need healing, or I'm not happy in my marriage or my relationship now, and I can't figure out how to alleviate that, and I think I need healing. I'm wrestling with all these things. It goes right back to pain carried over in one of these stages, and the way that trauma has impacted one of those stages. Now, with all of that said, these things can be healed.
Sure.
These things can be alleviated. And that's where I think that the Lord's Prayer actually leads us to that conclusion, is that he's actually encouraging us to find a place of healing on the deepest level of brain trauma by leading us in. This is the way that you should pray. Right. And he encourages that method of prayer from the secret place of knowing God intimately and privately. Like the thing that comes right before that is
I think
go into the inner chamber.
In this context, people might, depending on which side of that whole, I'm going through a string of broken relationships, I'm going through this, things don't seem to work out for me, sort of thing, versus the other side where I'm not going through all of that. So people on either side of that would look at the other person. Often this happens.
Yeah. What's your problem?
And say, So the person who's going through all the difficulties saying, how is it that you don't have these issues?
Yeah, that's right.
Why is it that, I have 3 friends that don't have these issues and 10 friends that do. And then, and then the people that aren't running through all those issues are looking at that person and saying, why do you keep going through this stuff? I mean, what is it about you that you just can't? And it has to do with the formation, the development of those parts of our brain
That's right.
as we move along that didn't get the things they needed, or they did get the things they needed. And the beauty is that some do.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. I think Wilder said something that was always interesting to me, that about 60% of the of Western culture, people in Western culture, don't get most of the things they need.
Right. Right.
And so at least we got 40% that are getting more than, getting a better chunk of them. And the beauty is that as we learn about these things and we develop ways to walk in healing, and we help one another, we can become more of that. We can increase that 40% more and more and
Yeah.
more, so that there's greater health in our culture and within our communities.
Yeah, that's right. We said in an earlier episode that, we talked about being able to stumble into maturity. Well, you can see, I hope you can see, based on what we're talking about, that stumbling into maturity is a myth. You don't stumble into it, but the right parameters sometimes present themselves, and some people struggle less and some people struggle more based on family of origin, their upbringing, and all of that.
Right.
I will say one thing, Dad, is that there's absolutely one thing that you can never have happen without understanding this and having worked through this, and that's healthy prophetic ministry.
Well, that's true.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you, not to say that a prophetic person needs to understand the concept, but you're never going to have healthy prophetic ministry if any of these four levels breaks down.
Well, if the lens that you are seeing and hearing through is damaged or cracked,
Yep.
then you will see damaged and cracked things and assume that what you're seeing is accurate.
Yeah.
Because for a variety of reasons, but because it's revelation, one would assume, well, it can't be. It's from God, therefore it can't be wrong.
Right. Right.
And maybe it's not wrong, but the filter you see it through is.
Yeah, because
then you communicate through that filter.
Because of this, okay? Mm-hmm. Revelatory moment. You hear God speak. You have you're presented with the opportunity to minister to a person prophetically, right? Okay, your thalamus is telling you what situation you're in, right? I have a person in front of me, okay? Okay, my smoke detector has gone off. This impacts a spiritual gift, because sometimes we tend to go, well, it's spiritual, it's not, this isn't part of the natural world, it's supernatural.
This person has a beard, and bearded people have always hurt me.
Exactly, right? Now my thalamus is feeding something up to my fight or flight.
Right.
And so now, right from the get-go, before I even think about what God is saying to them, right, I'm triggered. Right. And if I don't understand the triggering process, if I haven't gone through a season of healing, or if I wasn't lucky enough to be in an environment when I was growing up, or maybe I was lucky enough to be in an environment when I was growing up where I have a richly developed attachment center and my fight or flight isn't broken, but I understand how to respond to a threat when it comes, right? Yeah. If that system is not broken down, it's going to be much easier to give this person an uplifting word that encourages them on the journey to the Father. But if it is broken down, I'm going to read into the process. And again, on some level, everybody's system is broken down.
Right.
I'm going to read through the process things into the moment that aren't there because of the way that my brain has been formed. So you can't have healthy prophetic ministry with a malformed brain. You can't have it. You can't. And not understanding that and coming to grips with that is one of the reasons why we have prophetic ministry the way that it is today. And with the chaos that's ensued in the last 10 years or so, and especially the last 5 years. And it's because I think you have a bunch of malformed people who refuse to admit they're malformed. Let's come to the grips with it. We need help. We need healing, especially like there's this kind of concept in prophetic ministry where it's infiltrated through this phrase: "Don't touch the Lord's anointed."
Yeah.
Right. So the prophet or the apostle or whoever's bringing the revelation is perfect.
Pure revelation.
Yes, is perfect.
Pure,
and you can't question it. You can't question the person. No. You can, because we know your brain isn't perfect and it's not formed perfect. and it needs to be formed.
Right.
And if it's not, and it's never addressed, you're going to constantly have problems, especially within, you can apply this to leadership structures, you can apply this to anywhere. And it needs to be our rudimentary understanding for Christian discipleship. It really needs to be.
Well, and I think this is where, and I don't want to get into a whole nother topic, but I'm just going to throw this out for later.
Okay.
Is that this is where learning to interact with one another by keeping our relationships bigger than our problems.
Yeah.
Is part of that whole healthy process of learning to grow interactively and in community in healthy ways so that we learn to trust.
Yeah.
But if I don't allow my relationships to be bigger than my problems,
Yeah.
in other words, I get past my problems because I know I can trust someone. But if I don't think I can ever trust them, and I keep letting the relationships blow up and blow up and blow up and blow up, then my pure revelation is going to be tainted by these problems, and
Yeah.
I'm going to have an anticipation that something will create a problem, and I'm going to protect myself in advance.
Yeah.
And when I protect myself in advance, I can pretty much guarantee you that my revelation that I got has been modified by my interactions with the world around me before I even got a chance to say anything.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, Dad, I think we could just keep going on. There's so much we could say about this, but to suffice it to say, we'll just say this: the process of being a human being is a bodily process that's embodied within everyday life, and it's embodied within your physical matter of your flesh. And every single stimuli you're approached with, you go through this, and when the process breaks down is where we find difficulties later in life, and the need for healing presents itself. And when we understand the way that like if you have attachment layer trauma, there's a way of addressing that, which would be cortical, which would be pre-verbal. Typically, there's a way of addressing that that's different than just having a friend talk you through some issues.
Yeah.
And so when we understand these things, it can be very helpful for recovering, discipleship, transformation, and actually walking out the call of God on each individual's life.
Well, because you are a human being consisting of a body and all the other components that we've talked about, that was made for an earth existence so that you could celebrate the Creator and celebrate one another.
Yeah.
You're not a spirit just waiting to get the heck out of this horrible, evil place.
That's right.
And get to heaven where everything is so much better. That's not a biblical way of looking at it. The previous one, where I am
not a helpful way at all either.
No, because I'm just looking for escape.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's not looking for healing.
And that's where, on some level, we've talked about having an episode on worldviews.
Yeah.
Because it's this stuff becomes all encompassing when you really start thinking it through.
Yep.
And anyway, everybody, please give the podcast a review on whatever podcasting platform you're on. Give it a rating. Hopefully it's a high rating. And that's really helpful for us. And if you're watching this maybe later on YouTube or or something like that, then give us a like and subscribe to the video channel. It's always wonderful to be with everybody, and we're so appreciate the feedback and the impact that you guys have been telling us that we're having upon you. So thanks so much, and until next time, God bless.
See you next time.